Hi, welcome back to my channel. This is the first video in a new series of simple CSS tutorials where we'll be taking a deep dive into the basic building blocks of CSS. Today's video is on the box model and we'll be looking at what properties make up the box model, how we implement them and what issues we might trip over on the way. So without any further ado, let's jump straight into the project. So to start off with, I've created this very simple project. It's just a HTML file and a CSS file. I'm using VS Code and Chrome, but it doesn't really matter what text editor and browser you use. Everything we're going to touch on today is supported across the board. So if we have a look in our HTML file, we've actually got two divs, box 1 and box 2. And I've called them this because this is how we need to start thinking about all of our elements in HTML. Your divs are boxes, your spans are boxes, H tags, P tags, everything is a box across the board. And then we use CSS to style those boxes. So if we look in our CSS file, I've got a couple of little resets at the top here. We'll ignore those. Those are just to make it look a little bit prettier for us. The styling of our boxes is in two classes, box 1 and box 2. I've given them a background color and a height and a width just so we can tell them apart. So now that we've got our boxes, what is the box model? The box model is made up of 4 key concepts: content, padding, border, and margin. Now on our two divs, we've already got the content. We've got its height and its width and the text inside. So on box 1, we're going to add some padding. We're going to add a very obvious border here of 20 pixels. And I'm going to add a margin of 50 pixels. If I save that, we can already start to see what each of these are as they take form. But if it's not initially obvious to you, I'm going to show you a little trick so that we can see under the hood what's going on here. If we right click on this and we go inspect element, the dev tools pop out. I'm using Chrome, but the dev tools in all modern browsers are pretty similar. What we're interested in is this little panel here. Now you can see in the middle here, this is our content. We've got our padding layer, we've got our border layer, and we've got our margin. So the content is the height and the width. We've got 160 by 100 pixels. We can see that up here. Our padding is the space between the border and our content. We've got 10 pixels here. Our border sits between the padding and the margin, and we can think of it as a little fence between the two, and the margin is the space around our box. So now on box 2, we're going to drill down into these properties a little bit deeper. So we're going to start off with padding again. Now what we saw above is I actually used shorthand here. But with padding, there's a few different ways that you can write the same thing. So I can be very explicit. So I can go padding top is 10 pixels. And I can go padding left is 20 pixels. And if we save that, you can see that now if we inspect box 2 and we look at our box model diagram here, we've got 10 pixels on the top, 20 pixels on the left, and we haven't got any pixels on the rest of it. If we wanted to minimize the amount of code we are writing, we can use shorthand like we did above, but this time we can stipulate a different padding size for every side. So if I say the top I want to be 10 pixels, then it goes clockwise. The right hand side I want to be 5 pixels, the bottom I want to be 15 pixels, and then finally on the left I want to be 60 pixels. If we delete these out and we go back over to here, we've got 10, 5, 15 and 60 like we stipulated there. But that's not the only thing we can do with shorthand. If we wanted the top and bottom padding to be the same size and the left and right to be the same size, we can take these off the end and save those. And now if we jump over here, you can see it's top and bottom's 10 pixels, left and right is 5 pixels. And once again, like we did above, if all of them are the same size, we can pass it one value. Now, because of the way that CSS works and the way it cascades, we can actually mix and match these techniques. So we've got padding of 10 pixels all the way around. Say we wanted the left padding to be 50 pixels still. It takes the 10 pixels all the way around to the one above, and then it just overrides the left padding. So next up we have the border property, and that works ever so slightly differently to padding because we're passing it multiple parameters. If we look up at box 1, the first parameter that we're passing is the size of the border, and we're passing 20 pixels. The second parameter is the style. At the moment we're choosing solid, but I could change this to dashed, or I could do dotted, And there's other border styles that I can pass, including custom ones. And then the third and final one is the color. At the moment we're doing black just because it makes it a lot clearer on here, but you can pass any color in here. Now once again, we've done a shorthand here because we're assuming that all of our borders want to be exactly the same. But for box 2, let's say we want a border on the top and the bottom and we want them to be different. You might have guessed it, we go border, top. Let's say we want the top to be 10 pixels, dashed, and black. Then we've got our bottom border, and let's say that we want that to be 5 pixels, solid, and we want it to be black again, just to make it easier to see. If we jump down here, you can see once again, we've got our handy little guide in this diagram. We've got a border of 10 on the top and 5 on the bottom. Now let's add some margin. Now the way that you write margin is exactly the same as the way you write padding. You can do shorthand, you can do longhand, and you can do in between with the top and bottom and the left and right. So if I go here and I go margin, we want my top margin to be 20 pixels, we want my right margin to be 50 pixels, 100 pixels on the bottom, and let's say 25 pixels on the left. You can see 20, 50, 100, and 25 there. Now that we've got our boxes styled, we're going to run into the first gotcha with the CSS box model. So to make this clear, let's remove the margin to start off with. Save that. And let's say that I want these boxes to be the same width and same height, just stacked on top of each other with different borders and padding. So if I change this to be 200 pixels, and we save that. And now let's say that I want a padding of 100 pixels. Suddenly, our boxes aren't the same size. So I think to myself, oh, I'll do some quick maths here, and maybe if I make the width of this 380 pixels, maybe that would be a bit closer. But then I'm thinking, oh, actually, I want this one to have a border on the left and right. So if I go border left of 10 pixels, solid, black here. Oh, now they're not the same width, so now I'm thinking up here, well, now I've got to add the 10 pixels from here onto here, and now they're the same width. And we've only got 2 elements here, but imagine if we had a whole page of elements, and every time we make one of these minute changes to something, we've got to change the size of every element on the page. It just gets unruly and hard to work with. Now this is all caused by a property called box sizing, and its default value of content box. It's not a bug, this is exactly how CSS was designed to work. I don't think it's very intuitive, and that's kind of an opinion you'll see a lot in modern CSS development, and so we tend to override the default in a lot of frameworks. So if I scroll up here, I'm going to create another override here. I've got a catch-all selector here. I'm going to go box sizing, and I'm going to change that to border box. Instantly you see everything change there. We don't need this in view anymore, that's all we needed to do. And now, if we change both these widths to 400 pixels, and it now doesn't matter if I have 10 pixels or 100 pixels, the width of those doesn't change. The height still does, and that's something that we can deal with max sizes and overflow hiddens, but the important thing is the widths stay the same. And it's the same thing for border here. If I go 40 pixel border, you'll see that everything shuffles around inside, but the width of the box stays the same. So now that we've fixed our sizing issues using border box, there's one more gotcha with the CSS box model. And this gotcha I actually see trip up seasoned developers as much as I see it trip up newbies. So let's say I wanted to add a gap between box 1 and box 2. I'd obviously use margin, so let's go margin bottom, 10 pixels. So I go away from the project, next thing I know I get a Slack message from the designer saying, hey, I need that space in between box 1 and box 2 to actually be 50 pixels. So I decide to come down here and I go margin top 40 pixels. And you might think to yourself, I've got 10 pixels on the bottom of box 1 and I've got 40 pixels on the top of box 2, so now I've definitely got 50 pixels between the two of them. Well, quite simply, we don't. If I go here, I've got 40 pixels margin, and you can see that's the whole gap between the two boxes. And if I look at box 1, my 10 pixels is actually sitting underneath the 40 pixels of the box below. That's known as margin collapsing. Now this only happens with top and bottom margin. And once again, it's not a bug in CSS. Now there is times that this doesn't occur. It doesn't happen with some display types. And if you're interested in that, like and subscribe because my next video is going to be on display types. But for now, the simplest rule of thumb I can give you is never add margin tops. And this sounds like a silly thing, but there's actually no need. If you need space between two items, put a margin bottom. So here, I will go margin of 50 pixels on the bottom, and we've now got 50 pixels gap between. If I had a child element, so say this box was inside this box, and I needed space above the child box, I'll just use padding. And with that piece of advice in hand, that's actually everything we need to know about the box model. I know it can seem daunting to try and remember where all these things fit into place, but just remember that all modern browsers have developer tools, and the developer tools have this really great diagram that reminds you of where everything fits in. And even better, we can sit here and we can play around with numbers here. I can go 100 pixels and I can see it change in the diagram and in my web page. And on that note, if you like this video, please like and share and leave comments. I'll always make sure to get straight back to you. And if you're interested in these videos, this is the first in my series of simple CSS tutorials, so make sure to subscribe. There'll be more coming very soon. And other than that, just take care of yourselves.